Emma set the coffee tray down on the table and shouted loud enough for the whole room to hear, "Stop! Don't sign that paper!" The entire room went dead silent all at once. Robert, the man who owned all of it, held his pen a finger's width above the contract, and he looked at that waitress in her apron like she had lost her mind right there in front of him. Victor, the translator, went white as a sheet for a second, but then he let out a nervous little laugh and said, "Don't mind her, Mr. Robert. She's just a lost waitress." But Emma didn't take a single step back. She stared at the two foreigners sitting at the table and said, now in perfect German without a tremble in her voice, "I heard every single word you said. But to understand how a simple waitress stopped the biggest deal of a rich man's whole life, we need to go back a few days before that morning, when nobody in that room knew who the woman pouring the coffee really was. Robert Cole had built his company up from nothing, with his own two hands, over more than 20 years of hard work. It was a factory that made special parts, with a few designs he had invented himself, and those designs were worth a lot of money. But lately the bills had gotten tight, and he needed a new partner so the whole thing wouldn't sink. That's when the foreigners showed up. Two men in expensive suits, Klaus and Dieter, who said they represented a big group from overseas. They offered a mountain of money to become partners in the factory, and Robert thought he had hit the jackpot. There was only one problem, a problem that seemed small at the time. They would only sign the contract in German. Robert didn't speak a word of German, and neither did his lawyers. So the foreigners themselves suggested a translator, a man named Victor, who they swore was the best in town, and a man you could fully trust. Robert believed them. He thought everything was fine, that he just had to sign and the factory would be saved. What he didn't know was that Victor had already been bought. Meanwhile, on the other side of that fancy hotel where the meetings were held, there was a woman nobody looked at twice. Emma, the waitress from the restaurant, in a white apron with her hair pulled back, carrying heavy trays back and forth all day long, her feet aching inside a pair of old, worn-out shoes. But Emma hadn't always been a waitress. Years ago, she was a translator and a language teacher, a respected woman, who spoke German like she'd been born there. And there was a reason she spoke it so well. She had been married to Stefan, a kind and hard-working German man, whom she had loved with all the strength in her heart. But life made her pay a price no one should ever have to pay. Stefan got sick out of nowhere and passed away, leaving her alone with a little daughter, Sophie, and a mountain of hospital bills. Emma lost her house, lost her car, lost nearly everything she had, and had to take the first job that came along just to put food on the table. And the worst was still coming, because little Sophie got sick too. The girl needed a treatment that was expensive, very expensive, that Emma had no way to pay for on a waitress's wage. So every coin counted, every tip was saved, and that job at the hotel was the only rope still holding the two of them up. That's why, when Emma heard the foreigners talking for the first time, she almost let the tray fall to the floor. She understood everything they were saying, and what they were saying was ugly. Very ugly. While they smiled at Robert and shook his hand, between themselves they were saying something very different in German. That first day, pouring the coffee, Emma heard Klaus say quietly to Dieter, thinking no one understood, "This man is a fool. He'll sign anything we put in front of him." And Dieter laughed and answered, "The translator is already on our side. Leave it to him. The factory will be ours for free." Emma felt a chill run up her spine. Her heart was pounding like a drum inside her chest. She looked at Robert, that man smiling away, happy, with no idea he was being cheated right under his own nose, and a huge urge to warn him took hold of her right there. But Emma swallowed it down. She thought of Sophie, of the hospital, of the bills. Who was she to get mixed up in the business of rich men? If she opened her mouth and it went wrong, she'd lose her job on the spot. And then who would take care of her girl? So she lowered her head, filled the cups with coffee, and slipped away with the secret weighing heavy in her chest. That same afternoon, the first humiliation happened. Emma was pouring water at the table when Robert's assistant, a woman named Bianca, with her nose in the air and expensive clothes, looked her up and down with disgust. Emma had accidentally bumped lightly into her chair. Bianca stood up and said loudly in front of everyone, Can't you do one simple thing right? Look at the state of that apron. Look at those hands. People of your kind should stay in the kitchen, far away from important people. Get out of my sight and go clean this up, now!" Emma lowered her head and apologized quietly, her face hot with shame. Victor, the translator, who watched the whole thing, let out a mocking laugh and even nudged the foreigners to laugh along. Emma walked away with her eyes full of water, holding back the tears so she wouldn't give them the satisfaction. She went to the corner of the pantry, took a deep breath, and reminded herself again why she was there. For Sophie. Only for Sophie. If that made your blood boil too, go ahead and drop a like down below, because this story is about to flip, and you won't want to miss what comes next. In the days that followed, the meetings went on, and Emma began to see the size of the trap. Every time the foreigners explained something about the contract in German, Victor translated it for Robert as the opposite of what had been said. Where something bad was written, Victor said it was something good. Emma heard it all, quiet, pouring the coffee. In one of the meetings, Klaus explained to his colleagues, in German, that one part of the contract gave them the right to take all of Robert's secret designs, those inventions worth a fortune. Then Victor turned to Robert and translated. "This only says that you two will split the profits fairly, sir. It's just a formality." Robert, poor man, smiled and nodded, grateful, with no idea he was signing his own ruin. Emma gripped the tray hard so she wouldn't shout right then and there. She saw a hard-working man who built everything with his own sweat, being robbed to his face by 3 vultures in expensive suits, and no one in the world knew about it except her. At night, at home, Emma couldn't sleep. She sat on the edge of Sophie's bed, watching her daughter sleep with that weak little breathing, and her chest was split in 2. On one side, the fear of losing her job and not being able to treat the girl. On the other, her conscience shouting that it was wrong to let a man be robbed. Sophie woke up in the middle of the night with a fever and called for her mother. Emma rocked the girl in her arms, singing softly, and all the while she thought of Robert's face, that innocent smile of a man who had no idea what was coming. She thought, what if it were me? What if someone knew I was being robbed and stayed quiet just out of fear? It was that night, with her feverish daughter in her arms, that Emma made her decision. Whatever it cost her, she was not going to let it happen. She didn't know how, she didn't know when, but when the right moment came, she was going to open her mouth. Because some things are worth more than a job, and a person's dignity is one of them. But the courage you feel at night is one thing, and the courage in the tight moment is another. The next day, when Emma walked into the room to work, the fear came rushing back. She saw Bianca, she saw Victor, she saw the foreigners, all powerful, all rich, all ready to crush any waitress who dared to speak. Her legs nearly gave out. The day went by, and the meetings were coming to an end. Emma poured and watched, waiting for the courage to come, but the moment never seemed right. She got close to Robert once, opened her mouth to speak, but Bianca appeared out of nowhere and waved her off with a sharp flick of her hand, like shooing away a fly. Emma backed off again. Meanwhile, another humiliation happened that stuck with her. Victor spilled a little coffee on his own jacket sleeve on purpose, looked at Emma, and said loudly, "Look what this useless woman did. Are you stupid or just pretending? You can't even pour coffee right. Imagine speaking another language." And he laughed, and the foreigners laughed with him, not knowing she understood every word. Emma wiped his jacket sleeve with the cloth, head down, biting her lips. Inside her, a new strength was being born. Every one of those laughs, every word of contempt instead of breaking her, made a certainty grow. She knew something none of those men knew. She knew the truth, and the truth sooner or later gets too heavy to stay hidden. Then came the morning of the signing. The big day. The hotel set up its best room, with a long table of shiny wood, leather chairs, and a thick contract, pages and pages of it in German, right in the center. Robert arrived in a new suit, nervous and happy at the same time. thinking it was the most important day of his life. And it was, just not in the way he imagined. Emma was assigned to serve the coffee for the signing. Her hands trembled as she filled the tray in the pantry. She looked at her own face in the reflection of the coffee pot and said quietly to herself, "Today is the day, Emma. Either you speak now, or you carry this weight for the rest of your life. Think of Sophie. Think of your conscience." And she took a deep breath. She walked into the room with the tray. The foreigners were there, all smiles. Victor beside them, with a leather folder, looking pleased with himself. Bianca on one side, the lawyers on the other, and Robert at the head of the table, pen in hand, staring at that contract like a man staring at his salvation. Emma began to pour, slowly, with her ears wide open. That's when Klaus leaned toward Dieter and said quietly, in German, thinking he was safe, "As soon as he signs this page, the whole factory is ours, and he won't even notice. What an idiot. 20 years of work thrown away over one signature." And the two of them laughed softly, discreetly, toasting with their eyes. Victor even added, also in German, thinking he was so clever, "Leave it to me. He trusts me like he'd trust a brother. In 5 minutes you'll own everything and I'll get my cut." Emma, pouring the coffee right behind them, heard every syllable. Her blood boiled. Her heart raced. It was now or never. Robert lifted the pen. He wet his lips. He touched the tip of the pen to the paper, ready to sign the line that would hand his whole life away for free to 3 thieves in suits. And it was in that exact second, with the whole world against her, that Emma set down the tray and shouted with all the force she had been holding back, "Stop! Don't sign that paper!" The shout echoed through the whole room. Everyone froze. Robert's pen stopped a finger's width from the contract. He raised his eyes, not understanding a thing, and he looked at that waitress in her coffee-stained apron like she was a madwoman who had crashed the most important moment of his life. Bianca jumped to her feet, her face red with rage, and shouted, "Have you lost your mind? Get out of here right now, you insolent woman! Somebody call security!" Victor, beside her, tried to hide his shock with a laugh, but his hand was trembling. The foreigners traded a quick glance, and for the first time their smiles wobbled just a little. Robert raised his hand for silence. He was a man who had climbed in life by listening to people no one else listened to, and something in that woman's desperate shout made him stop. He looked at Emma and asked, serious, "Why shouldn't I sign? Talk. You have 30 seconds before I have you thrown out of here." Emma took a deep breath, straightened her back, and said, "Because that translator has been lying to you since the very first day. He doesn't translate what the foreigners say. He tells you the opposite of what's written in that contract. And what's written there is going to take away everything you built in your life." Victor exploded, all nerves. "This is outrageous! She's just a waitress, Mr. Robert, a woman who serves coffee. How could a person like that understand German? She must be crazy, or after money, or who knows what. Throw her out of here before we lose the deal." His voice came out louder than it should have, and his face was sweating. That's when Emma turned to the two foreigners and spoke. But she didn't speak in the language of the room. She spoke in German, clean, correct, fluent German, from someone who had lived the language her whole life. She looked Klaus in the eyes and said, "I heard you say he's an idiot. I heard you say the factory will be yours, and that he won't even notice." The whole room went cold. Klaus turned white. Dieter opened his mouth and no sound came out. Victor started to sweat, his eyes wide, unable to believe what was happening. Robert looked at the waitress, then at the foreigners, struck dumb with fright, and something began to make sense inside his head for the first time in days. Robert stood up slowly and said, "Go on, tell me more. What exactly is written in this contract that I was about to sign?" Emma picked up the thick contract from the table, her hands steady now without a tremble, flipped to a page in the middle, and began to read out loud, translating every line on the spot, from German into plain words. "Here, in Clause 7, it says that you hand over all the rights to your secret designs to their company, getting nothing in return. It's not a partnership, sir. It's a gift. You're giving away for free the inventions it took you 20 years to create. And the translator told you it was a fair split of the profits. Robert took the contract from her hand and looked at those German words he had never been able to understand. He looked at Victor, and Victor could no longer hold his gaze. The translator shrank back in his chair, stammering, She's making it up, sir. It's a lie. I'm a professional." But his voice came out weak, with no ground under it at all. Robert, to be absolutely sure, took out his phone and called an old friend of his, a German professor at the university, a man he trusted completely. He put it on speaker and asked, "My friend, I'm going to read you a sentence in German, word by word, and you translate it for me right now. I need to know the truth this instant." And he read Clause 7, slowly, word by word. On the other end of the line, the professor translated, and his translation matched exactly what Emma had said, word for word. The whole room heard it. Robert slowly lowered the phone, and his face began to change, from doubt to anger, a deep anger of a man who finds out he was nearly cheated by people he trusted. He turned to Victor and said, in that low, hard voice that scares people more than any shout, 20 years of work, and you were going to sell me off like cattle for a commission. You looked me in the eyes all these days, shook my hand, ate at my table, and the whole time you were robbing me along with these two." Victor opened his mouth, but Robert raised his hand and told him to be quiet. Klaus tried to save the deal. He forced a smile and said, in a heavy accent, "Mr. Robert, there was a misunderstanding, just a translation error. These things happen. Let's talk like businessmen." But Robert cut him off at once. "A misunderstanding? You laughed at me to my face, in your own language, thinking I was a fool. The fools here were you, for underestimating a woman in an apron." At that moment, Bianca, the assistant who had humiliated Emma, tried to hide behind the others, ashamed. Robert turned to her and said, "And you, who treated this woman like trash, who sent her back to the kitchen. It was this same woman who saved everything I own. While you judged her apron, she was the only honest person in this room." Robert picked up the thick contract with both hands in front of everyone and tore it from top to bottom. The sound of that paper ripping was the most beautiful thing Emma had heard in a long time. He threw the pieces on the table, looked at the foreigners and said, "The deal is off, and tomorrow morning my lawyers will know about every single thing that happened here. You'd better get ready." Klaus and Dieter gathered their things in a hurry, pale, and rushed out of the room almost running, with Victor behind them stammering apologies no one wanted to hear. The foreigners even tried to talk to the translator in the hallway, but now even they looked at him with disgust, because a thief doesn't even trust another thief. Victor was left alone, with no deal, no commission, and no reputation. When the room emptied, only Robert and Emma were left. He looked at that woman in the coffee-stained apron, his eyes glistening, and said quietly, "You risked your job to save a man you don't even know. Why? Why did you do that, knowing I could have had you thrown out of here?" His voice was choked, full of gratitude. Emma, her voice calm now, answered, "Because I've lost everything in life too, sir. I know what it's like to feel the ground vanish from under your feet. And I couldn't have slept knowing I let a hard-working man be robbed just to protect my job. My husband always said we are what we do when no one is watching." Robert asked, curious, "Your husband? And where did he learn German to teach you like that?" Emma smiled sadly and said, "He was German, sir. Stefan. We were very happy until he got sick and passed away. I used to be a translator, a language teacher. But when he was gone, with the bills and my daughter's illness, I lost everything and ended up here pouring coffee." Robert stood there in silence, feeling the weight of that story. He, who had nearly lost his company because he couldn't understand a language, was saved by a woman who had lost her whole life, yet never lost her character. He held out his hand to her as an equal and said, "Emma, today you didn't just save me from a contract. You reminded me what really matters in this world." In the weeks that followed, Emma's life turned upside down, but this time for the good. Robert made a point of hiring her right away, no longer as a waitress, but as the head of the international department of his company, the woman who would handle every negotiation in other languages. No one would ever fool Robert Cole at a contract table again. The new salary changed both their lives all at once. Emma was able to pay for Sophie's treatment, that expensive treatment that had seemed impossible. The girl got better day after day, and her laughter came back to fill the new home the two of them moved into. For the first time in years, Emma slept through the whole night, without the weight of the bills crushing her chest. Victor, the translator, never got another job in that town. The story of what he did spread around, and no one trusted him with a single word again. The foreigners became defendants, taken to court for the attempted scam, and their names were burned forever in the business world. Justice, which sometimes takes its time, arrived that day fast and full of reason. And Bianca, the arrogant assistant, was let go the very next day. One late afternoon, Emma stood at the window of her new office, looking at the town down below, when she remembered all those days of the apron, the heavy tray, and the aching feet. She remembered the laughter, the humiliations, the fear. And she understood that none of it had been for nothing. Every pain had served to build the strong woman she was now. And that's where the lesson of this story lives, folks. A person's worth is never in the uniform they wear, nor in the money they have in their pocket. A person's worth is in what they do when it would be easier to stay quiet. Emma could have pretended not to understand, could have protected only herself. But she chose the truth, and the truth, sooner or later, always finds its way to win. Now let me ask you something. Do you think honesty is always worth it in the end, even when it looks like it's going to cost you everything you have? Tell me down in the comments, and let me know where you're watching from while you're at it. I read every single one. And if this story touched your heart, go ahead and hit that like button. Then subscribe to the channel and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a new story.